Based in Larkspur, California, Stephen A. Nielsen is a U.S. registered patent attorney with many years of experience in patent procurement and in achieving favorable results in federal court in the field of intellectual property litigation. Mr. Nielsen is the past chairperson of the intellectual property section of the Marin County Bar Association. Mr. Nielsen received his JD in 1987 from Bolt Hall, University of California at Berkeley, and also holds a BA in computer science. He may be contacted at steve@nielsenpatents.com, on his website, nielsenpatents.com, or via his LinkedIn page.
Thank you, Robert, for that very kind introduction. It's always a pleasure to do videos for your company, and I'm honored to be on my 10th or so year in putting these videos together. Today, we're going to talk about competence issues relevant to an attorney's ability to perform legal services. Some of the rules have changed recently as to requirements to maintain our license. Rules vary in different states. One of the goals here with respect to competence is to cover issues such as substance abuse, mental decline, physical decline. And so this presentation was going to hit on all those, where in the past we'd have a separate video perhaps for each subject. My name and email address are here on this main screen. As I'll mention at the end, I always welcome video, emails or letters after a presentation. I do respond to most, and I'm only as good as the feedback that I receive. So I value people's emails to me regarding what they hear, how it's presented, whatever information you care to share. I do enjoy reading that. What are we going to learn today? Interesting changes in the various rules in the various jurisdictions for 2025. Each state bar has its own twist. We're going to talk about substance abuse, which pertains to competence, depression. I call drops of water over time. It's not always so dramatic. And the new other categories of impairment, variations of mental and physical issues. And we're going to talk about how do we monitor our competence over the span of a career. Things we don't talk about in law school, and things that just sort of come up from myself being a lawyer for many years and seeing various lawyers in various stages of their career. Why are we here today? First and foremost, to keep our license to practice law. I'm under no illusions of grandeur that people listening to this, it's totally their free choice. We're all required to keep our hours up, and you do have a choice on which videos you watch. So again, I'm honored that you're choosing to watch this video and other videos from CCE. We're also here today, at least I am, and I try to write this presentation to consider ways to live life to its fullest and to consider ourselves as a whole. I know in our society, we kind of segment ourselves and other people. You go to your physician, you have this formal relationship, and you can't imagine your physician as a full person, even though you may see him at the gym or her and doing other things. And a good analogy is that young children, if they see their school teacher outside of the school, they lose context of that. Their minds have trouble seeing the teacher outside of school. So the relevance is for us to consider our lives as a whole, our professional life, our personal life, social life, if we're really going to be competent and to live our lives to the full. I think about our responsibilities to others in our workplace. No person's an island, and whether you're younger or older, we have a responsibility to behave in a way that helps the whole organization and ourselves. And it's easy for us to forget that because often the practice of law, even if you're with a large firm and you're with a team, a lot of it is a solo endeavor. You're looking up case law, you're writing your brief by yourself, and we forget that we are in an ecosystem, whether you're a solo practitioner or in a large firm. So we consider the bigger picture as now encouraged by our rules of the California State Bar in this new category, which deals with a lot of issues regarding competence and hopefully some ones that you haven't considered before. The rules, I had to look this up, beginning of this year, various hours for recognition and elimination of bias, and 2 of those hours addressing competence, 1 hour of which must focus on prevention and detection. So I attempt to, well, I do cover all of these, so hopefully that'll check some boxes as you go through your, every 3 years, your check boxes for what you need to do. And as I wrote here in the notes, recognition of the problem is half the battle. The term substance abuse is no longer in this rule of the California State Bar in this recent change. And to me, it implies a much broader and more thorough study of competence, or perhaps the State Bar just left it out for no particular reason. But I'm going to give some meaning to it, that we look to ourselves as a whole in respect to our competence and ability to be of service to others. Substance abuse. Many of us, if we've been doing this for a while, have heard many lectures. They're often repeat lectures. We've all been in lectures where there'll be sometimes a recovered attorney who lost his or her license or got suspended. And I've met some that now their new job is to present these issues and to help other attorneys who are in trouble with the State Bar for various forms of substance abuse. And when I say we've heard it all before, the familiar phrase is that people need to hit rock bottom before they decide to get some help, or help is imposed upon them. This term rock bottom has various meanings for various people, and I think we all get an idea for what that means. The issue that I've seen, I'm sure many of you seen, is that good lawyers, some good lawyers eventually take to drink or drugs, hit rock bottom, and they get help and hopefully get to work ever after in a good firm, have a good practice. That's not always the tale. Some people end with a tragic accident or an overdose. And sometimes you go to these lectures and there's a tiny fairy tale, as if there's an obvious states of dysfunction and a clear way out. And it's not always that simple. It's not always that black and white. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. And also, how does the story change as the new 420 laws make other substances readily available? And do they seem to be gateway drugs or not? From my observations in literature, it doesn't seem to have led to other problems. But the question is, has it seemed to change the core issues? Substance abuse, what can we add? We're all different. Sort of an oxymoron. You're different like everyone else. Some can function well for a while. I think we all know of high functioning alcoholics who can binge drink on the weekends or for some period of time, show up for work and do pretty well. Of course, the classic story is when someone shows up sober, people realize how smart this person is. So obviously the binging, you can function, but you're not at your full performance. And then the issue of we're all different. We have our ancestors and the environment of ancestors, genes selected to survive the brew pub or different environments over the thousands of years. Darwin has this theory of reproduction of the fittest. Some people call it survival of the fittest, but it's actually reproduction of the fittest. And so we're all different. We're all have different genes and we all have different childhoods. And that raises an issue of personality traits. Is there an addictive personality? A great deal of ink has been spent on this, and we're not going to go into it too far, but it's something to think about. And it's also sort of a co-variable. People who go to law school, uh, arguably they're high achievers, they're very aggressive, very ambitious, to have that addictive personality. So maybe that comes with hard work, and then the addictive personality comes to playing hard and then enjoying other substances that are addictive. Substance abuse, how does it start? A lot of different theories on this. I've really enjoyed reading a lot on the subject. And how does it start? One theory I've heard from someone who actually runs a rehab center, and this was off the record, what she told me is that many of her clients just enjoy the altered mood. They just enjoy drinking, they enjoy doing drugs, they enjoy the altered mood. And it doesn't always have to do with some deep underlying issue where psychologists can dig in. And from my own observations, there is a percentage of people who just enjoy the overall experience until it's not so enjoyable. Another issue with alcohol is that it's all around us. Every state bar function or local bar association, you're going to have alcohol, and it's just in our social DNA. So it makes sense that it'd be very easy to become addicted to it, and it's always around, and it's sort of accepted to something to do. And now medical and recreational marijuana is now all around us. I've observed a lot of vaping of marijuana just in airports, even in airplanes. And I haven't read things about that becoming a problem yet. Maybe some of you can write me some emails about how you've seen it destroy lives, or maybe it's something that people can kind of hold it together with. And even though it may not always be a gateway drug, is that harming people as a whole? I haven't read literature to that effect yet, but I'm always on the lookout to read what are the new studies saying about recreational and medical marijuana. Another news item is the prevalent use of ketamine. And is that a new rabbit hole leading to a lot of problems from what I've read? And I've also talked to an anesthesiologist who uses ketamine in his practice. And I said, what's the deal with that? And he says that it's complicated. And I stopped him there. I said, I didn't want to hear a half-hour lecture on how the molecules move around, but I'll take him for his word that it's complicated and it's something to look at and to figure out, is this a problem? I know there's various clinics, and I met this retired gynecologist who came out of retirement, and she prescribes ketamine in this clinic, and sort of joked about how it's prescribed to anyone. And so there is ketamine being used in scale today under medical supervision, along with psilocybin, commonly known as mushrooms. From what I read, this hasn't led to a lot of problems, but it's something to monitor and to look out for. Prevention. How do we prevent this? One way is to set limits upon ourselves. I'll have 2 or 3 drinks. I'll have so much ketamine, so much psilocybin, so much marijuana. But as most of us know, it's when you get in that altered state, are you able to set the limits? And a good analogy of this has to do with people who are trying to lose weight and the diet. And it's been fairly recently shown that when we eat sugar, especially fats and sugar, we have a different wiring in our brain where we don't feel full. And so we consume much more than we intended to consume with sugars and fats. And my favorite analogy is that maybe you go to Trader Joe's and you buy a pint of ice cream and it says 5 servings. But once you get home and it's after 8 p.m. and you start eating this ice cream, it becomes 1 serving. And so our brain has a different pattern. So when people talk about setting limits, that's a difficult thing, because once you start enjoying the ice cream, you want to consume all you have. And I'm sure there's analogies with other substances. One way to prevent is, personally, I don't take ice cream home because I know I'm going to eat it all after 8 p.m. And so maybe setting the limit is just to limit what you have available to you when you start eating the ice cream, and you can draw your own analogies. How else do we prevent substance abuse and other addictions? And my best answer is to enjoy the feeling of being on top of your work. So I want everyone here to imagine that their inbox is empty, and I'm sure very few of us have empty inboxes. Imagine when you go to bed at night, you're not thinking about things that are due a week, a month from now. Imagine the feeling of you leave work at hopefully 4 p.m. and you say, yeah, I've done it. I can go home and relax because nothing's due over the night. I can just let that go. So that fantasy or that goal, hopefully it's a realistic goal, is a wonderful way for prevention, because anything that gets in your way, whether it's mindless phone calls from people, distractions from your smartphone, of Instagram feeds, whatever it is, to think about that. Also, an incentive is not fearing phone calls is a big incentive, in that do some of us fear phone calls from clients where we're behind on their work? Do some of us, when the phone rings, we look at it and we just hope it's not someone else? Do some of us think about, gee, I don't want to get an email today from this client because I'm behind getting the project out? So not thinking about not having to worry about clients who are waiting for their work. So prevention, think about the feeling of being on top of your work. Substance abuse detection. I think we all need a couple of good friends to tell us the painful truth when it arises. Difficult thing. And my mother used to say, to have a friend, you've got to be a good friend. So, can you be such a friend to someone who you care about, who you have a relationship with? Can you value their health over a temporary agony in your friendship with that person? So, nothing's more personal than having a friend and having sort of a pact. Hey, if I start to go off the rails, let me know, and to have that be reciprocal. I mean, I wish this is a large lecture. I'd get a show of hands who has such a friend. Very few of us, because it takes a while to think about that. So I'm asking you to think about that right now. Think about in your mind 3 friends you could contact after this lecture or this evening or this weekend to say, hey, I saw this nutty lecture on substance abuse detection, prevention, talked about having friends who would step in if they see something go awry. Also helps to have a friend to talk about your struggles and your consumption and what's going on. Unfortunately, very few of us will stop on our own. We all know a few people, maybe 10%, who seem to have the ability, maybe it's genetic, who knows, to stop on our own when the substance abuse has gone too far. Most of us are going to need some outside help. And also, how many of us are willing to raise our hand when we think we need some help? And again, as I said earlier, realizing you have a problem is really a big part of the battle, to be honest with ourselves. And to think about, if we see a friend going off the rails, this next line I have is, what are the moral obligations dilemma of using reasonable force to stop a drunk driver or a drug driver from getting behind the wheel? And that's a bit extreme example, and the answer is a bit obvious. What's less obvious to us, and something that we need to ponder, is how much pressure, how much force, how many words, what sort of I won't say intervention, but interactions to help someone who seems to be having some trouble. And it's difficult because if someone's sort of under the influence or they're addicted, they're going to deny, they're going to lie. We've all seen this before. So it's a struggle. And it's also, as far as boundaries, what are, say you do your best with a friend, or maybe you have a child who's going down this road, how far do you go? And it's something only you can answer yourself, but it takes up a lot of space in my mind when it arises. And I would suggest we all think about it and ponder, how do we be a good friend to someone who appears to be struggling in the face of them lying to us and denying And reasonable minds can differ, and I'll leave it at that. And as far as the evolution of this subject, as we have more substances that the police and CHP aren't so able to directly test for, such as drug driving, whether it's marijuana, ketamine, psilocybin. I know there's MDMA and other hallucinogenics, ecstasy. I could just go on. And they don't test so well from the blood, but the field sobriety test is usually the litmus test. And what kind of complexity does that add? Probably more for law enforcement than for us, because we can see somebody who's going downhill who just seems to be out of it. So the bottom line is, to be a friend, to have a friend, you gotta be a friend. So you gotta sometimes stand up to a point where it's uncomfortable. Treatment of substance abuse. And what I'm always amazed by is I haven't seen a plethora of the classical double-blind studies that we rely upon in pharmaceuticals. And I think we're still in the dark ages of treatment. We don't have a flu shot type cure of treatment. And what's interesting is, more recently it's been found that the Ozempic type drugs, the GLO-1s and Zepbound GL2s, seem to help with a lot of addiction, whether it's binge eating or alcoholism. I think that's more chemical. And I've read some studies and I've heard from pretty good reliable sources that people have had horrific drinking problems. They go on Ozempic and they lose a lot of weight, and they lose the urge to not drink so much. Of course, I'm also familiar with stories pretty close by of people who overeat through their Ozempic. Say they perceive they have a weight problem, they take Ozempic and they keep eating more anyway, and they tend to go off because it's just wreaking havoc. I haven't heard stories of people out drinking their Ozempic yet, but I'd be curious to hear from members of the audience if they've heard or seen stories of that. So that seems to be an unintended benefit to these new GL drugs that come out. So who knows what the treatment is, and also the difficulty in treatment also derives from the various reasons for the addiction, or maybe not addiction, but overuse to where it impairs someone's ability to practice law. And I think that's a pretty standard, reasonable benchmark. Where does it impair your life? Just sort of a basic benchmark. So it reminds me, the benchmark of hoarders is, do you have so many things in a room you can't use the room for its intended purpose? And by analogy, is someone taking such substances, they just can't live the lives they were living before. And as far as the treatment, I really enjoy reading about these treatments. Some people really have a great experience with AA. Some people rebel against it because there's issues of religion in there, and not everyone can be God-based. But I have read about derivatives of AA that are not faith-based, and people seem to do well when that's just an objectionable part of it. There's also a movement, I think it's died down a bit, called rational recovery, where they disclaim there is no God. What's interesting there is, Carl Sagan used to say it's very difficult to prove a negative in the universe. So who's to say there is no, quote, no God? How do you define God? Sort of the rational recovery ethos is you must pull yourself up. So there's a lot of ink spilled, a lot of different ways to go. I think one could create their own hybrid as to what works for them, as far as how much help you want, what sort of, do you want a faith-based? Do you want to believe in some higher power? Do you want to just have this idea of pulling yourself up? Of course, that's an interesting ethos. I really enjoy Arnold Schwarzenegger's ethos of, no one is a self-made person. Successful people, they get help, they build a team. And from what I've read, that is very true in the treatment of substance abuse, mental problems, and a lot of other ways. Very few people do it alone. You build a team, and I emphasize that ethos here, as well as for the treatment of what may be bothering you, whether it's more mental, physical, substance. That's the way, that's the ethos, and it's not a sign of weakness to build a team to help yourself. Mental impairment. That is a big issue of competence, anything that's going to impair our ability to practice law, mental impairment. Um, Back in '08, our state bar of California is considering adding mental illness as an alternative topic. The goal was to encourage rehabilitation of lawyers. But it wasn't until 2014 that the rule was amended to include mental or physical issues that impair us. For 2025, as I mentioned before, we just have the topic of competence, which requires us to think for ourselves on the issue of what's involved in competence. I think mental impairment, mental illness are big parts. And what's good with it is we get to cover all of them in this required subject. There's a wonderful company called Mindshare Partners based out of San Francisco. And it's about mental health in the workplace and destigmatizing mental health in the workplace. And it goes with this earlier ethos of considering ourselves as a whole person, which includes a working person and also our environment at work. We spend a great percentage of our hours working, whether you're telecommuting or you're physically going. So I think it's great that Mindshare Partners is looking at work. And to my surprise, they've been very successful. I'm a bit older, and I grew up with the ethos of mental issues. You're morally weak. If you need help, something's wrong with you, just gut it out, figure it out. But they're destigmatizing mental health in the workplace, and they have a plethora of really good literature on the subject. They'll come to your law firm or business and give a lecture and set up a system. And I can see many people right now rolling their eyes thinking, oh, work is work, don't be a baby, stick it out. But they seem to have done a good job in that balance between working hard and self-responsibility and having some mettle to yourself to go through the hard projects versus if you need some help, get some help, maybe through work. And what they've noticed is that on the average, a person waits 8 to 10 years before they're going to ask for help for mental health condition. That's nearly a decade of symptoms unaddressed and untreated before someone decides to seek support. So it would be preposterous for many of us to consider not getting any help if we had a cold or a fever over a month, let alone a decade. So for our mental health, but for mental health, that's the norm to wait forever. But if you think about with the physical health, we wouldn't wait 10 years to get treatment for something. We go to the doctor right away. So if you think about that, it helps destigmatize the issue and hopefully helps all of us, if we think about that, to get help sooner rather than later. Because again, for a broken arm, you'd get help right away. Also for Mindshare Partners, it takes more than access to solve mental health. It also takes social acceptance of the issue. It takes reducing the strong stigma associated with mental health conditions and symptoms. And current studies show that 8 out of 10 employees won't seek treatment for mental health because of fear and shame, regardless of treatment options. And I think all of us can just intuitively know this is true because, again, the stigma of, oh, I'm depressed, I don't feel like going to work, or I'm having a lot of anxiety. And I've read that anxiety is currently the largest mental health challenge for a lot of people. And it makes sense, especially in a law firm environment where we're all so competitive. We compete on the LSAT. We compete to go to the quote highest ranking colleges, whatever that means. We compete on grades, and then after our first year, we compete to get the big interviews with the big white shoe firms. And if we get into such a firm, we compete with our 10 to 30 summer associates or first year associates to move through the ladder. So anything that's we perceive that's going to hurt our competitiveness, we're going to stay away from. So maybe in the law biz, it's maybe, you know, 95 out of 100 won't seek treatment. But think about that, and maybe we can change that, or maybe the big numbers don't really matter. You just think about yourself and your friends about the need to seek treatment, seek help, and save yourself, so you're not a story of mental depression where you miss deadlines and you get suspended by the state bar and you're in a lot more trouble for all involved. A lot's been written about anxiety, and a lot's been written about depression. From what I can read, I bring the question, is depression the kingpin of impairment, or a great deal of impairment? And I think depression can often be a covariable or a result of anxiety. Who knows? I mean, a lot of ink's been spilled, but depression may keep people drinking or using substances just to sort of numb the pain of it. I've read that people who become homeless, say you're barely making it, and you need a car repair, or some expense comes by, you can't pay your rent, so you're homeless, and from the pain of being homeless, somehow people acquire drugs to numb the pain of being homeless. So it wasn't the depression that got them homeless; it was the pain of being homeless that got them depressed. And so that begs the question: well, if you're having a hard time at work, will that lead to depression and lead to the use of substances to deal with the depression? So I think we're still in the dark ages regarding depression. We're just starting to take PET scans to see brain activity and effects of a proposed treatment. Things seem to be going well there. I've also read studies. I think it's MDMA that's being approved by the Veterans Association, the veterans, for treatment of post-traumatic stress. So we're seeing some movement in these substances that were developed in the 60s and then hidden away. So there seems to be a resurgence in such research, and there's some hopeful studies on that. So I have an open mind to reading those studies. There's a great video and book called Rewiring Your Brain that looks into these other substances. And so there is some hope that we're going to have a better handle on this. But for now, there is no scientific consensus, and I'm going to venture to say a lot of junk science. Depression, the effect on other issues. We have the Robin Williams example of a physical brain problem leading to depression and his own demise. Sometimes it's not so dramatic and so linear. There'll be sort of a slow decline. I'm sure we've seen that in various colleagues and people, where it doesn't happen overnight. And you meet such people and there's just no spark. I mean, what can you do as a friend? Well, we've discussed that, but it's something to look for in others, and it's something to look for in yourself. Ask yourself, do you not enjoy things as you did? Do you not get a good laugh seeing a good comedy? Do you not wake up on a Saturday morning with all kinds of ambition and hope for things to do? We can sort of see it in ourselves when we lose that sort of spark, a sort of joy of life. And a lot of it also has to do with what we're going to call boundaries that we'll get to in a second. So there's also a cause and effect of pessimism versus optimism. And what's super interesting is we talk about mind over matter and an attitude having a physical effect. Well, the more recent studies talk about how our cells from our brains send messages. There's something called EVs, or extracurricular vesicles, which is a substance leaked out by cells. They're sort of inert, and they're coding their messages that could fit into other cells and help a body, a living organism, communicate and do better as a whole. So through that very legitimate scientific inquiry, we're seeing that chemicals you release in your brain or your brain cells, they'll produce different EVs, extracurricular vesicles, that go out and attach and penetrate other cells and code other information into those cells. So what does this mean? It means this old, what I thought was a myth, and I didn't always believe it. A good attitude helps you well. A good attitude changes your brain, which in fact sends physical signals to your other cells that are beneficial. So to me, this is sort of for me, a recent discovery for me. I know there's a lot of new work on EVs out there. So I'm suggesting there is a strong cause and effect of pessimism versus optimism. And there's a good saying of fake it till you make it. And I sincerely believe that if you just get yourself in a good attitude, it really does help. And I know people may call that junk science, but I think there's science that's starting to support that. And no one says it hurts. And confidence is contagious. So I would encourage all of us to have more of a theory of a feeling of optimism, an ethos of optimism, even in the midst of despair, because that's when you need it the most. And there's also a lot of, if you act happy, you might become happy. And also on depression, to control stress levels. Stress is a worthy subject of a separate lecture. But for now, I think the big picture is for all of us to set boundaries and not to get overwhelmed. A whole lecture could be done on boundaries. And my quickest takeaway from what I've read is we should all take 3 breaths before agreeing to anything. And also, what I find is when I'm asked to do something, say somebody backs into my daughter's car and he's a neighbor and I know him, and he says, "Hey, can we just do this through, I'll pay out of pocket. I don't run it by my insurance." And so I took 3 breaths, and this neighbor started screaming at me that I don't trust him and all these vile things. And I thought, oh, there's my answer. We're going to go through insurance. So there's secondary benefits to taking 3 breaths before agreeing to anything. Because a lot of people, they can't handle the silence, and they show you who they are. And my example with my hypothetical neighbor backing into my daughter's car, it was just a really unexpected consequence. It's just thinking before I speak, which I tend to do anyway. And it can have great advantages, sometimes disadvantages. People think I'm enthusiastic or that I'm maybe dense because I think about things a lot. But I think it's just a great rule to take 3 breaths before agreeing to anything. If you can, you can do that. And maybe you're a junior associate and you got some cranky senior partner telling you to do things, asking you. Of course, maybe it's more telling you to do it. That could be a bit tricky. But to the extent you can, just ponder before you agree and think about, well, maybe moving something off your plate, because you're not a machine. If you're a young associate at a firm, you will be eaten alive and you will be in bad shape with your cortisol levels and depression if you can't set some boundaries. Again, we could do a whole lecture on this, but that's my biggest message: to think before you agree to anything. And overall, there's ample room for scientific improvement in dealing with depression. Depression can be sort of umbrella for other issues or a subset for issues higher up that cause depression, such as anxiety. So it's an interesting thing to study. Prevention, detection, treatment, act positive, be grateful. When I heard about gratitude as being helpful, I really thought it was just foo-foo science. Just what's a good word? Just make believe. I didn't believe it at all. And then I kept hearing it for years and years. And my older uncle, who's no longer with us, talked about being grateful. He was born in the 1930s, where people were not so open to new ideas, but he believed in it. So he got me thinking about it. And so I'm finally on the gratitude train here of seeing the value in it. But if some of you think it's just a crock, I hear you, I understand you. and on one more person say to try it, maybe you need 100 more, or maybe you never try it, and that's fine. It's your existence if you don't want to try something to help yourself. It sounds too good to be true, but I believe it. And again, I think there's certain chemicals in our brain, the EVs that go out, talk to other cells, sort of this mind-body connection that we're finding is actually very physical and not so much mental. And again, detection, have you stopped enjoying things? We talked about that before. Just think about what you enjoyed in your childhood. Maybe you grew up in a small town, you went snow skiing, you loved it. Maybe you enjoyed playing tennis. Maybe you enjoy playing pickleball now, as harsh as that may seem. I recently played it and I loved it. And I thought, this is a great, fun thing to do. So acts of having fun, have you stopped doing that? And then treatment, good luck. It's all over the place, but stay positive. There's an interesting book by Rick Hansen, Hardwiring Your Brain for Happiness or Hardwiring Happiness. It's an excellent book on the subject. Mental issues. Assume mental fitness at the start of a legal career, question mark. I remember going to law school, very successful students, when they weren't interviewing, they seemed to exhibit a tremendous amount of anxiety. And what's interesting, when they would interview, they would pull it together and they'd be fine. And to me, that taught me a lot of things, such as a lot of people, they perform well, but deep inside they're as confused, as unconfident, is that they're maybe very competent, but they pull it together. So maybe it's okay that they express and show anxiety when they're getting ready for the interview or getting ready to take a law school exam, a bar exam, or getting ready for a trial or a deposition. A lot of anxiety is shown. And so the question I have is it safe to assume mental fitness at the start of a legal career? I don't think so. I think a lot of people become lawyers because we're type A, we're go-getters, and maybe we have something to prove to ourselves. Maybe we have a lot of anxiety, a lot of insecurities. So we want to have this great career for various reasons. Some of us become lawyers because we enjoy the work, we want to help others. There's a whole bell curve on that. So I don't think it's safe to assume that when we start our legal career, we have mental fitness. I'm interested in your opinion on that. I think it's an open question beyond the scope of this lecture, but it's a very relevant question for all of us to think about our own mental issues, more of mental health, depression, anxiety, OCD. There's a lot of different things going out there beyond just the impairment issue, the onset of dementia, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. So to me, it's an open question, but I think we should all think about it. And also, what we're going to focus about later in this lecture is on mental changes that occur over the course of a career, something we're going to see more ourselves in ourselves and others. Yeah, it's just a mixed bag. Imagine at law school, there's always a few people who just ask the insipid questions over and over on what's going on with them. Who knows? So again, don't presume we're all fit at the beginning of our career. Age, the great thief. I don't know where I first heard that or saw it, but it just stuck in my mind. And when I look at pictures of people in various stages of their careers, I know AI does a lot of interesting loops with, say, Kirk Douglas lived to be 105, and the video goes back from 105 to in his 20s when he was just a phenom, and the changes that occur, and you just think, yeah, age is a real thief. And it leads to the question of what is a normal aging process leading to cognitive decline. I got to speak to this very famous patent lawyer who was 105 at the time. He was an old folks' home. And somehow I had the pleasure to speak with him. He's a named partner of a very well-known firm. And he was mentally acute as anyone. And what he said, his big obstacle now is just getting around mobility. And so there's a whole bell curve as how people age mentally and physically. And hopefully all of us will get to talk to people at all ends of the spectrum. And it's just amazing to talk to people who are 90 plus and just sharp as a tack. I find it very inspiring. I also find it inspiring if you're at the gym, there's people there who are 85 who are just doing it, great moods, active. They may not be the norm, but I just take great inspiration from seeing that. So I would encourage all of us to, don't be afraid of older people. We sort of have this stigma. It's not going to rub off on you. And when you find someone who's, late 80s, 90s, and they're just killing it mentally and or physically, it's inspiring. It makes you want to take care of yourself now, makes you not want to eat a bunch of junk. And one of the greatest lines I've heard on aging is the phrase old people will say is, had I known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of myself. Think about that. Had I known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of myself. So I think about that every day. I mean, odds are we're all going to live to be pretty darn old. And what do you want to look like when you get there? Do you want to be a burden to your children, grandchildren, to society? So it motivates me to stay happy and physically active. Okay, so speaking of stress and are we mentally fit in the beginning of our careers, let's presume hypothetically uh, there's an illusionary figure you might call the big law biter. Imagine there's a summer associate for a white shoe firm that maybe has some mental issues, and there's, it's almost legend now about this. And from what I can read, someone who's just sort of playful and feels a need to bite people as a way of connection. And this is very rare. But the point is, even very young people can have mental health issues that we all need to be aware of and to gently address for the sake of themselves and others. And what's sad about the big law biter is that, unfortunately, with social media, there's just no privacy anymore. And a lot of people seem invested in the lives of others. I know we have the Coldplay Kiss Cam that changed lives. I was reading an article about that today. The fascination people have with the lives of others. But the relevance here is that you have the big law biter. How many other young lawyers are out there who have issues that should be addressed? To me, that's the takeaway from that. I think this is an extreme example, way, 4 deviations away from the Gaussian distribution or the bell curve. So even young people can have issues. Also, what's interesting about decline and age being a great thief is we can't rely on the marketplace. As far as when you hire lawyers, what lawyers performing well, and you think under the legal profession is not like a butcher shop found in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. It's a book I had to read in college, and people think a lot of people haven't heard of it. Just sort of the marketplace sort of self-corrects. The idea is that people are going to know if the butcher's giving them good meat, if they're getting the fair weight. You have sort of this transparency. Probably doesn't really work in today's society. We really don't know when we buy an Apple phone what's in it, what's going on. But so the marketplace doesn't work. It's upon ourselves to figure out um, what's going on with ourselves and others. Dementia happens. I think Ozzy Osbourne passed away very recently, and I think he had dementia toward the end. And I'm sure we all have seen people who have it. Maybe you have a parent who had it or have it, or a grandparent. And it's really it's a difficult thing to somebody who's physically there and they're mentally gone. I just can't think of anything harder than to have a loved one go through that. The relevance to us is there's various grades of it, and it's typically a catch-all term for various stages of the brain that occur over time, stages of cognitive decline. Such changes may affect behavior, memory, and judgment. The American Academy of Neurological Studies estimates that 10% of persons age 65 are going to have some form of dementia, and up to 50% or over at the age of 85 will experience dementia. I hope these are skewed numbers. I hope it's not really that high. From my experience, it's not, but I'm not in the medical field, and maybe the people who I see out and about don't have dementia because they're out and about. Maybe people with dementia are more inside, so I'm not going to run into them. So maybe my experience is not a accurate biopsy of the percentages, but it's a difficult fact of life. And I have so much empathy for people who have it and people who are helping a loved one get through. You don't get through it. You just live with it. When dementia happens, what do we do? Hopefully we close down our practice, or if you're working for a large firm, you can gracefully exit. Hopefully you've saved enough money in your SEP or your retirement account. And the state bar has, I'm sure every state has this as well, guidelines for closing or selling a law practice, ways to gracefully unwind so you don't leave any clients high and dry, so you don't have any money in your trust account that belongs to your clients. And in that regard, California's really beefed up its trust accounting. It's really worth looking at if you're in California and other states. It was so onerous the other year that I called the state bar and said, I don't understand the question. And the person who wrote the guidelines ended up calling me back and explained these various trust accounts. This isn't the time to get into it, but the relevancy is our state bars are great sources of information, and how to close down a practice is certainly one of them. So it's done gracefully. And also, this is where you really want to have someone watching you and watch someone else to when it's time to hang up your cleats and to do it gracefully. And then there's treatment, seek professional medical help, and talk therapy is excellent, and that can occur from a friend or a therapist if you have the resources for that. What we can do is avoid or slow down natural cognitive decline. And the studies are really good on this. Taking new mental challenges. I recently read that learning a second language noticeably increases our brain density, which is an objective measure of our cognitive ability. And there's one upside to being learned, hopefully many upsides. Hopefully we enjoy our work and get satisfaction from helping others, but we're paid to think and solve problems, which helps our neuroplasticity and memory. And what's the relevance for that in 2025? Because we have AI. Well, the good news and bad news of AI is that we need to train AI, and we can be very rigorous and hard-nosed in training our AI, which I think helps our neuroplasticity. And we're sort of solving a problem, seeing the mistakes AI is making during our training, asking for resources, asking for refinement. So I see AI as helping our cognitive abilities if we aren't lazy and we obsessively train our AI. Also, that leads to what we call a magnificent obsession, whether it's training AI, which I think is just, again, a wonderful thing to do, but also more classical ways to keep our neuroplasticity, learning to play bridge, solving crossword puzzles, and enjoying hobbies can slow our cognitive decline. I've also read that music in the background can also help keep our neuroplasticity going. And we also want to avoid negative mental conditioning. We evolved as hunters and gatherers. I really enjoy my lectures going back to Bernowski's The Ascent of Man. That was a popular textbook in the 80s. And then we talk about Guns, Germs, and Steel by Professor Diamond of Stanford. And I'm continually amazed and intrigued how it was just 10,000 years ago that we started agriculture and built whatever we have today, and all the changes. And the relevance is our DNA hasn't caught up to our relatively sedentary lifestyles from when we were hunters and gatherers. And most of our physical activity um, earlier was of a slower, life was of a slower pace, which allowed for thoughtful reflection. Today we have sort of our point and click society where we don't have the hours of reflection. We don't take 3 breaths before agreeing to anything. And that hurts our cognitive decline because if we multitask, we're really harming our telomeres. And also, I like to consider the hours of careful thought and study um, Newton did to develop his Newtonian laws of physics. Newton had just a few physical instruments to come in with his macro laws that are still hold true today. The macro laws, the small ones we're still working on. String theory we'll never figure out, but so I digress. And I think about that and how careful hours of thought really discovered some amazing things. Got us here today. Think about Copernicus looking at the stars and figure out, oh, the Earth goes around the sun. Huh, interesting. And think of how he had to look at the planets to sort of see that and figure that out. The relevance is if we can slow down and have thought and reflection, it helps our mood and it helps our cognitive abilities. The twitch and click life will change your brain. Studies show that video gamers undergo noticeable change in brain structure. And since the advent of the fax machine, the practice of law has sped up. Unless we're careful, we face constant electronic messaging or electronic interruptions. And it's very difficult to deal with this. Clients, they text, and now we're texting. And in litigation, the text records are a big exhibit. So things have sped up. So it's kind of going against the grain to sort of unplug and have the quiet thought that helps us get more gratification from our work and helps the quality of our work. Yeah, constant interruptions are a mental impairment. Studies show that constant email interruptions can result in drunk driver type mistakes of productivity. Even a 2-second interruption can cause people to lose their train of thought. Stopping interruptions to decrease mistakes has really taken some weight. There's a great article back in 2013 on the subject. And also, I know we all loved, Kaiser's the medical provider we all love to hate. Every medical provider, you're going to have some stories on either side of the spectrum. One thing I admire is Kaiser goes to great lengths to allow nurses to be undisturbed when they prepare medications for patients. And this is one of my favorite slides. Old world focus, think of Newton figuring out the laws of physics, Copernicus figured out how do these planets spin around. This Kaiser worker here, she's wearing a yellow ribbon, which means don't bother me, don't interrupt me. She's looking at her computer screen, doing very important work on prescribing medicines. And isn't all of our work that important, or we should give all of our work that attention if we're going to do it? And here it is, there's a physical barrier, this yellow ribbon, so people aren't going to bug her. And she's focused, she doesn't have her phone out. So this is a very meaningful slide to me, and I think we should all aspire to have the focus depicted here. And then I ask, are you as focused as a Kaiser worker? And here's a slide of a young associate at a law firm being hit by paper from a partner, a friend reading a text, post-it notes flying about, coffee being spilt, getting amped up on caffeine, sort of a quasi-amphetamine. And the short answer is no. You're getting hit so many ways. And how do we stop this? It's a challenge. And also, our mind does not want to go back to work after interruption. I'm guilty of this. After an unscheduled interruption, we tend to move to quick, easy tasks, such as checking Google News, text, or other email, or other small distractions. Once we get our mind out of the zone, we don't want to go back. and we pay a steep price in time and effort to reload our working memory with a demanding project. Think if you're drafting a patent, you've got your claims out and your drawings out and your spec, and you're really thinking about that. It takes a while. And a more relatable example to most of us is going to be if you're doing a motion for summary judgment. Think of all the ideas you've got to hold in your working memory and how long it took you to study the pleading, study the case, to get all of this in your head. You get a quick tweet or something, or Instagram, who knows, and then your mind goes down the spiral, and you just have this hesitancy to go back and reload your working memory to get back to that motion for summary judgment. So I think that's really an important thing to think about. What was focused in the old world? I think about high school chemistry class, watching a candle for 30 minutes and writing our observations in a lab book, building model airplanes from balsa wood and tissue. Consider interruption management, schedule your viewing of email, schedule phone calls. I like to schedule phone calls for the afternoon. To me, it requires less cognitive ability. And in the mornings, it's just intense reading and paperwork. Enjoy the potential efficiency of technology and the mental gymnastics to stay current. As I mentioned before, AI is wonderful because you got to do some rigorous training. And we don't need to be Luddites. We don't need to go back to the card catalogs of the library. So in summary, we want to keep an active mind, enjoy hobbies, outside interests, have a couple of friends quiz you, check in with your practice, especially check compliance of your deadlines, carve out time for major projects, and as for treatment or prevention, refocus efforts on puzzles and other mental challenges. We also have physical issues that impair. We're sort of running out of time here, so I'll just briefly hit on these. It's the slow burn that damages our bodies. We sit at these desks, we push our mouse, we type. We need to walk around, as I've talked about before. Sitting's the new smoking. We need to keep moving. Standing desk, I have one. Do I use it? Probably no, I don't, but I have it, and it goes up once a month. So I just try to get up and walk around for every phone call. And improved eating activity does not have to be extreme. Simply walking a bit is sustainable. Trying to eat more salads with little dressing is not a difficult goal to achieve. And delegation at work. Can an attorney truly be solo in 2025? We still have a duty to supervise, and there may be times to say simply no thank you to new work on all levels of our practice. At the end here, I have some resources with Mindshare partners, other resources here with some links, and a wellness guide for senior lawyers and their families, friends, and colleagues. That's a link to the ethics area of the California Bar. And in summary, keep moving, build your team. No person makes it alone. And I appreciate your focus to have gotten to the end of this lecture. Again, I welcome your questions and comments. I respond pretty much to everyone. And I hope you enjoyed this and you're inspired to make the small changes that are going to help yourself and everyone involved.